If you knew me before, you wouldn't even look my way. If I had the nerve to speak, you wouldn't hear what I say. Time has come and gone so fast, we're not who we used to be.
And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Greg. Greg, thank you so much for being with us this morning. So I ran into you at a function of my friend Lauren. TBI and autism don't go hand in hand sometimes. So we actually met at Lauren's party. And when you started to sort of talk about your story, I was like, I need to know more, because your story is one that's common enough that people need to hear it, but also that people don't believe that it's as common as it was. And I think the great place to start is how you got involved in firefighting to begin with.
Yeah, I had a great career. Out of college, I got a job doing hazardous material, spill response and investigation, working for an EPA contractor. This was kind of the dawn of the Superfund age. We traveled all across the country investigating spills and toxic waste sites. I mean, this was technically fascinating. We were truly working to make a difference. Over that about 15 years I did that work, the client mix started to change. Government contracts ended. We started pursuing work with Fortune 500 companies because A, they have problems, and B, they have money. And it got to be, while still technically interesting, it started to be ethically challenging. We're going to help a major mining company negotiate a good deal on their cleanup. And sometimes there was still a silver lining. One was a big smelter that the state of Ohio wanted shut down, and 23 acres of waste rock moved to a secure landfill. And that's $1 billion. And the bankruptcy court hired us. And ultimately, we saved 100 jobs in a small town, and it was technically fascinating. But at the end of the day, we were still working to save someone's profits. And, that was probably the technical highlight of my work, but it started to become more of a challenge. Go ahead.
And one of the things I want to touch on there, because I think it's fascinating, because I don't think a lot of people realize that when profit is involved, you're no longer motivated by the safety of people first. You're motivated by making money first. And that's a different outlook on everything when it comes to safety and cleanup.
Yeah, very much so. So another project that was really kind of the coffin and the nail in the coffin was a big timber company that owned facilities through California was going to sell them, and they needed a line on the budget for what their environmental liabilities were. And they hired us. It was technically fascinating, traveling to their facilities in Northern California, timber mills and other facilities. And we're trying to estimate what it was going to cost to clean them up. This project came in mid-December. It was due January 1st. We worked late Christmas Eve day for essentially facilitating a real estate transaction. And it turns out the attorney was out of the office for the first 2 months of January anyway. So we were busting our butt to maximize, and get information to facilitate a real estate transaction. No one benefited from this. And so again, while this was technically fascinating, it was started to be frustrating. So I spent some time thinking, what work provides benefit to the community, the greater community? And my wife's been a teacher for 40 years. Clearly education, clear benefit. Medicine, helping people who make things, people who fix things. Now, granted, some things we make and fix are more valuable than others, but we need tradespeople and someone who creates real value because they make something with their hands. So this all was simmering in my mind, and literally I saw an ad in our little weekly paper that said volunteer firefighters wanted. And I live just outside a little town of about 5,000 people. Volunteer firefighting. I'd never ever thought of that. I signed up. I'll just go to the open house. I'll turn in an application. Oh, no, yep. I'll go to the interview and okay, I'll sign up and I'll do the training. And that first year, I think was 30 Saturdays and 30 weeknights of training. And I was so impressed with the caliber of the people, the importance of the work they did. And, I worked in Bellevue and I lived in this little town and everybody knew my wife because she was a teacher there. I didn't know anybody. I'd go to a business and write a check. That's how old I am. We wrote checks. And, everybody recognized her name on the check, but no one knew me. Well, once I became a volunteer firefighter, I had 8 best friends immediately. These were people generally my age, with kids in our schools, who were my fellow classmates in that recruit class. And with no intention of doing this as a career, I was a volunteer firefighter for a year, finished the training, and I applied for a job and got it, which is unheard of in the fire service, that you get the first job you apply for. So it tells me it was meant to be. So, um, again, small town, we're not that busy. There's lots of opportunities to make a difference. I became kind of the detail guy, always watching out for the little pieces and parts and keeping things running smoothly. I remember lying under a fire truck in a puddle of water with a rubber mallet, with a cell phone in my hand, talking to the mechanic, trying to figure out what part I'm supposed to hit to make the pump work again. And I was, the detail guy and making things happen. And I moved up quickly, became a lieutenant, captain, and then I became in charge of training. And then I got promoted to, it was kind of weird, an exempt position as a battalion chief. And battalion chiefs usually run groups of stations, or they can be administrative functions. So this cleared the path for me to kind of create my work. I could take on projects, be the problem solver. It was really satisfying. And when there was a need, I'd run out the door on a red SUV. And as I like to say, help create order from chaos. You could arrive at the scene, you have good firefighters there, and make it all happen. So it was a great job.
And I like to kind of pause there for a second there, because I was reading sort of the information that you passed off onto me. And one of the things that stuck out when you're talking about you sort of created a job for you, not a lot of people would have taken the approach to create the kind of work that you created. Like, you went out of your way to create something special and unique that the fire department may not have even known they needed. So what was the thought process there? What was it about that piece of your job? Because that's just so forward thinking and out of the box that you just don't normally see.
That's a great question. My son-in-law asked me, he says, Greg, you have got to do so many interesting things in your life. How does that happen? And I said 2 things. 1, I'm ADD, and 2 is I have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. So I'm constantly seeing things as like, oh, that's really worthwhile. We should take care of that. We should do that. And also, the overdeveloped sense of responsibility. We shouldn't leave that for other people to take care of. We're going to do this. And so, as firefighters, we were a little tiny department. We didn't even work 24-hour shifts when I started, and that was the goal. We're going to be a big fire department and work 24-hour shifts. We finally got to that stage, and the chief offered me a benefit, an additional wage, if I'd stay on days, because I was so good at taking care of things. And another example is I was on the school board and worked for the fire department. And this is a time of some of our horrible school shootings, and our firefighters were asking, what are we supposed to do? What's our plan? Well, I'm in charge of training. We're going to do training on this. I could not get our little police department to participate. So with my influence in the schools and the fire department, we put on our own training and eventually dragged the police along. But it was an example of this needs to happen, and I have the connections to do it. And we had a real honest, boots on the ground, active shooter drill at our high school. And it wouldn't have happened without someone like me putting the pieces together.
And that's one of those things that I find interesting, because if you would think about that scenario, I would want the fire department to have practiced that before it actually happens. Because if you don't practice before that happens, and I'm sorry that we live in a world today where that's a possibility, but we can't ignore the fact that that's a possibility. And so the idea that kicking and screaming the police came onto the training is a little disheartening, and yet at the same time, I'm glad they did because that's such a huge component that a lot of people don't even realize. And so I really want to acknowledge that you did that.
Well, I think we just guilted them into it. When I first got on the school board, already having been a safety professional in the hazmat world and being a firefighter, I was asking, what are we doing for student safety? What do we do if there's a disaster? What do we do for school shootings? And at the time, I was told by the school superintendent, that's not our responsibility. You have 3,000 students under your care. This is your responsibility. Well, we don't want to talk about school shootings because that'll scare people. Well, they're scared anyway. This is happening. And so I was pleased to be able to be the one to push and make that initiative happen. Now they've got a robust safety program. They have school security officers. These are non-uniform people. And it's all an initiative that we started years ago just by raising an important question.
And that's usually the start of really effective and awesome change. It's sometimes it's out of necessity that you don't even realize you need it as badly as you do. And then once you've walked through it and when you realize, oh, okay, this is the why.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so take us along the way. So you're starting with that training position, and
Yeah.
then along the way you start to develop some hearing loss.
Yeah. So I had a hunch that I had some hearing loss in my 40s. About almost 18, 19 years ago, I had a doctor say, yeah, we need to test your hearing. Really? Took the test, says, yeah, you need hearing aids. And they cost, I don't know, $3,500. And of course, it's not covered by insurance. And I talked with my wife. She says, it might not be a bad idea. So I got hearing aids. It wasn't severe enough problem, but boy, I was embarrassed the first time I wore them to the fire station. One of the guys, what's that? And they started to understand why we'd have a shift meeting at the watch desk in the truck bay, and I'd make them turn down the radio playing country music across the truck bay because I couldn't deal with that background noise. And it was all manageable. And then in 2010, I had surgeries for unrelated issues on both ears. It's called surfer's ear. If you swim a lot in cold water, the ear canal grows closed. This is brutal. They cut off your ear, scour out the bone, open up the canal, and stitch it all back up.
Ow.
I know people who've done this multiple times, and had the surgery, and my hearing was impacted by the surgery and the dressings and all that, and it didn't get better. And they go, oh yeah, well just watch and see, it'll get better. And then I started encountering static, so I could be talking to you and hear you clearly, and suddenly your voice would just turn to fuzz, like feedback, and it became harder and harder to manage. And the doctors were all, well, just wait and see. He's like, no, he's not normal. So eventually I got a referral to an excellent surgeon, and we did a bunch of tests. Says, yeah, you have an autoimmune disease called cochlear hydrops. People may have heard of Meniere's. It's an inner ear disorder that causes severe vertigo. It's closely related to that. It's a pressure on the inner ear structure. So this doctor was aggressive in his treatment. We took prescribed medications to help stabilize, and things were going okay. I got better hearing aids and then still better hearing aids. But I became more and more concerned about my ability to do my job. And I shared this with my friends. I said, I'm going to get fired. And one of them said, and this was brilliant, well, whose job is it to decide that? Oh, shit, it's my job to decide this. Shouldn't leave this to my boss to decide whether I can do my job or not. So I went to the chief. I said, hey, I'm really concerned. I can do 95% of my job, but there'll be some situations at an emergency scene, which again is a very small part of my job. I was primarily administrative, emergency preparedness, training. But when I'm on scene, there will be situations that I cannot do. There'll just be too much background noise, and my hearing will not. I can't hear on the radio clearly if there's background noise. And his response, oh, go ahead.
Can I pause real quick?
Yeah.
Because I want to back up before I lose a thought.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how much time between when you first told your doctor that there's something really else going on and when you got that referral? How much of a delay was that?
The surgeries each year was separate, and that was 2010. One was in the fall, one was in the winter. And then that spring, I started speaking up and saying, this is not right. And I kept getting, oh, no, don't worry about it. But it wasn't the medical system that got me the referral. It was sharing this with a friend in the medical profession who says, I know who you need to talk to. So you're right. I see where you're coming with this. It was not a question of, the doctor saying, aha. It was someone else saying this is not right and helping connect to the right doctor.
And how frustrating that must be, because I have a similar story that I won't get into here, but a medical issue that I had for 6 years that went undiagnosed until I was having lunch with the surgeon in a totally unrelated manner. He asked, why are you limping? But anyway, so go back to that, because I just want people to hear, like, if you have a medical issue and you are not getting what you need from your doctor, keep pushing. That's where I wanted to interject right here, right? Because it's very important that you advocate for yourself in the medical realm, because the medical system doesn't advocate for you. Sorry, I wanted to go off on that tangent, but that's just it's a pet peeve of mine.
It's completely relevant. And if I hadn't made an issue of it, they were just going to continue to dismiss it as, we'll just wait and see. So no, the ability to work in an important industry is not something that we're just going to wait and see. And it affected my family life. My kids would come in the room and I couldn't understand a word they said. Sometimes it'd be static, sometimes it'd be crystal clear. And so I went to the department, and the chief, oh yeah, right. I'm right there. I can hardly hear my right ear. It's all good. We'll find a solution. And I didn't hear another word for about 4 months. And then the union brought it up and said, we're really concerned about Greg working on the engine, because of his hearing. And they called me in and said, hey, this is a big deal. The union raised this. What's this bullshit? I brought this to you 4 months ago, and you said we can find a solution, and I haven't heard another word. Well, he was embarrassed. So we started the whole process of going to doctors and getting the medical evaluation, critical job functions, the whole thing. And the results were very mixed. The department chose a doctor who was apparently accustomed to signing off on disabilities. And you don't want to work, do you? And he was ready to sign off that I couldn't work. And I'm going, no, I want to work. And that was, but eventually it came down to a letter was served to me that said, you can no longer fulfill the terms of your contract, a personal service contract with the department. You will be fired, and you will finish up your 6 months this year, and then you're done.
Did they use the word fired?
Oh, we're going to terminate your contract.
Okay.
Yeah. Or your
same difference.
Yeah.
But I'm just clarifying at that point.
But it was very clearly that you cannot fulfill some portion of the terms of your contract. And that was the ability to work in a high noise environment at an emergency scene. That was a very small percent of my work, but it was a very important part of my work. And that was devastating, and just happened to be that I had plans to go night skiing after that afternoon with a friend, and I think we were both suffering, some grieving over some losses, and we just had a great time. I think the app showed we were going like 50 miles an hour down some of these hills. They took that feature away from the app, I should point out. And so, I'm really glad I got to be away from my family that evening and just kind of, swear and moan and complain and suffer. But the next day I went to work early as always, and I found the chief and the deputy chief in an office talking, and I stood at the doorway with a handful of papers, and they wouldn't make eye contact because it was like, God, what's Greg going to say? What's he going to do? And I finally got their attention. Says, hey, we have this big project we need to finish up. I need your signatures on some paperwork. And if you want to get this done, we need to move on it. And that, I think, stopped them in their tracks. They're going to fire me. I've got several months to wrap up, and I'm there to do my job to the best of my ability the very next day. And ultimately what happened was they gave me a 1-year trial in what's called a non-combat position. So, I'm still in uniform, still have my rank, but I'm no longer allowed to drive a red truck to an emergency scene. So I have all my administrative functions, and I took a 30 to 40% pay cut.
Pause right there, folks. Pause right there. Did you just hear what he said? He took a 30% pay cut just because of a disability. So when all of you are talking about this stuff doesn't happen, this stuff happens. Like, people are forced all the time to continue almost at the same level they are before, but get paid less for no reason other than you have a disability. This happens in this country right now. And I just want to acknowledge, I'm so sorry, man. That's so jacked up. Like, how do you wrap your head around, like, oh yeah, we're going to accommodate your disability, but you're less than you were before, so we're going to pay you less.
Yeah, it was a bitter pill to swallow. I'd already done one career change. I'd gone from the hazmat world, where I had worked my way up the corporate ladder, took a big pay cut when I had 2 toddlers at home to start over as a firefighter. I'd worked my way up that salary scale and to battalion chief. And the idea of starting a new career again would probably mean a long commute to some new community and probably starting over in a new pay scale. So, the quality of life to stay at my little department that was near my home with a fair amount of flexibility. I could still flex my schedule a little bit. It was like, I'll swallow my pride. I will do this. So that was tough. Another piece was probably more so than almost any other career. If you were a firefighter, that is your identity. I'd been the union leader for 10 years. I'd been to the National Fire Academy. I'd been all kinds of training. And most of my wardrobe had some sort of fire department logo on it. And, driving around our community and adjacent communities, hey, there's engine 11. Oh, look who's on duty. Or here's our engine 66. Who's on duty today. And you knew about the incidents, you knew the people. And I made an intentional decision at that point to use that time to make sure this was not my only identity. I pulled back a tiny bit from the fire department, and I doubled down on some of my other activities to make sure that I had a identity and connections through my school board work and through some other volunteer opportunities. And people ask me, well, this isn't legal. Well, I talked to lawyers and essential job functions. It was legal. And the option was to not work.
And that's even more of less money. Like, that's even like 3 times a step below that even. And it's so frustrating to me, because it's just like, it's one of those stories you hear all the time. Because, like, if you think about it, right? Because, like, I'm looking at you and what you're able to do for the department, and all you've able to accomplish, and everything that you have done to make things better for our society, and all of those years as a union person, and the way they thank you for all of your service is to say, oh, I know your injury is probably a result of this job. Let's cut your pay because we hurt you, and here's our way of saying thanks. Oh, that's tough. But yet also, I commend you for sucking it up and continuing, right? That must have been a hard choice.
Well, to clarify, there's nothing that tied the bulk of my hearing loss to work. So none of my expenses were covered by labor and industries. It was all by my insurance or out of pocket. And I've probably spent over $35,000 on hearing aids. And rounding up, I think $100 was covered by insurance. So that's another penalty of having a disability, is the out-of-pocket costs. So I tried to do a couple things. One is I tried to own this hearing loss. I was going to know absolutely everything I could. I read books. I joined the Hearing Loss Association of America, and they have a Washington State chapter. The very first meeting I went to, a chapter meeting, I started chatting with this woman sitting next to me, and that was in 2013. We were just on the phone recently talking about cochlear implants and tips and tricks. And so that was a connection. Eventually went on to be on the board of the state organization. And for a year, I think it was 2014 or 15, I was the president. They are a busy group, and it's really hard to be full-time employed and run an organization like that. So I pulled back, but I was going to own it. I was going to know everything there was. I was disappointed at my audiologist. She had said to me, "Well, Greg, you're so much different than my other patients. You're so active. Most of my patients, they want to watch TV and go to church." Okay, time for a new audiologist. And the Washington State Department of Vocational Rehab connected me with a really excellent audiologist. And I just bought a new pair of hearing aids. Well, she sold me a much, much better pair. And I think I went back to her every couple of weeks for 6 months till we got the programming and the fit and everything optimized. Her persistence and patience were so commendable. I also, this is hard, but I tried to go to work every day and say to myself how fortunate I was to be there. And I had taken pride in I joined the fire department out of a desire to serve my community. And it took an adjustment to realize that designing the training program for the firefighters is my contribution to their success, or handling the customer service complaints or taking on special projects. We adopted a new patient care software. And so that was, who wants to learn a software and teach firefighters how to use it? That's that's like beating your head against a brick wall. But eventually our firefighters came to recognize how hard I was working to make their job better, to make sure they had the tools, the training. I did work on policy. Eventually got promoted to be the division chief of support services, which meant I was in charge of building a new fire station. I was in charge of the trucks, in addition to still being their emergency manager and a lot of other things. But I went to work every day reminding myself that I was still there to serve the community, and I was lucky to do that. So owning it and trying to keep reminding myself how fortunate I was to still be able to serve. And then people saw that, and I got a lot of respect. People told me how much they appreciated that approach.
And it's a testament to your character, right? And I want to acknowledge that, because it's one of those things where a lot of people want, like, the urge for me was there when I got out of the military and I hurt myself, because I was I was honorably discharged medically by the military, and the urge to just give up and wallow in it was there. So the effort to kind of get past that and grieve the loss of whatever, like the loss of hearing, because there's a grieving process there, but to still kind of know we're going to push forward and we're going to make it easier for the next person who has to deal with this shit. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Mm.
So you're transitioning now, and then you're back into the fire department, you're being respected, and then there's some sort of a takeover?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know how that works.
Well, we were a small fire department. We had 24 firefighters, plus we were a fire district, so that's like a school district. You exist as a separate junior taxing district. There's an elected board of officials. They hire a chief, and so we had about 2 stations, 24 firefighters. And we were remarkably well equipped and well trained. We had a lot of recognition from larger departments for the caliber of our people and their training. And then there were some bad choices were made at the top. A chief retired suddenly. They brought in someone else who was very disruptive. His leadership style seemed to be, "You're all fucking morons." He pointed his badge and yelled at people, "This says chief. You do what I say." I'm going to write a book. He's going to be 2 chapters. And it just got ugly. The union versus the fire chief. Oh, this fire chief gave a direction at a fire that resulted in a firefighter being hurt. And his direction was in direct violation of state law and our policy. Our little fire department got a $43,000 fine from Labor and Industries because of the action of that fire chief. So in the middle of all this tumultuous time, our elected board decided it was time for us to consolidate or merge with another department. And that's a trend. There's inefficiencies in having every little fire department have its chief, its HR, its finance, and training. So they pursued that process, and we were going to merge with an adjacent city, technically be a contract. So we would still exist, but we would write a check to that city to run and operate our fire department. And so I was asked, as essentially the second in charge of the fire department, maybe third in charge of our fire department, to go interview with their chief about where I might fit into the organization. I'm looking forward to it. I want to tell them about what I do, the work we've done, our connections to the community. And they didn't ask anything. I said, yeah, we're familiar with you. And we chatted a little bit, and they said 3 separate times, we don't know where to put you because of your hearing loss. We don't have a place for you. Well, I'm really engaged in emergency management. We have one. And I'm excellent at project management. I just oversaw the construction of a fire station. Yeah, that's not how we do it. And the meeting ended, and I went away feeling like shit. It's like, I was so excited about what I could bring to their organization and contribute. And all I heard was, we have no place for you because of your hearing loss.
And what a complete and total violation of the ADA. A
Yes.
complete and total violation of the American with Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
By a state government. Like,
And it gets better. I was so pissed. So I went home, and that weekend I thought about it. I do a lot of advocacy work for the hearing loss world. I fight medical systems, state agencies to make sure that accommodations are provided. So I put a post on LinkedIn that says, I recently interviewed with the CEO of a large organization. I never mentioned that they were a fire department. I never mentioned their name. This organization brags about how they're a welcoming and inclusive organization. And then I mentioned, I recently interviewed, there was no discussion of my ability. The take-home point was they had no place for me because of my hearing loss. I didn't hear anything for a couple weeks. Everybody else in our organization was slotted in different places in their org chart, but everybody told me, they haven't made a decision yet. Then I get a phone call from an elected official, says, do you want to work for them? Well, I certainly do. Well, they've decided you have a bad attitude. They saw the post on LinkedIn and apparently recognized themselves. And it says, you have a bad attitude and you're not a team player and they don't want you. So you have to decide whether you want to work for them or not and take that post down.
and this is something that happens all the time. And this is one of those things where people ask, what is retaliation? That is retaliation. Like when you, as a person with a disability, and this has happened to me on numerous occasions in my life, the minute you advocate for yourself and say, like, you're violating my rights. Like, I had an employer before that literally did not abide by the ADA, and I had written accommodations that they violated. And this minute I spoke up about it, then I have disciplinary actions. And like, I'm the person that's there 30 minutes before everyone else, right? I'm the person that doesn't take a break. I'm the person that gives you 80 hours a week because I care. And yet I'm too kind all of a sudden to do the work that I'm doing because I'm advocating for myself. And so this whole concept that people don't understand is like, the minute you have a disability and the minute you advocate yourself, you become a problem. And that should not be the case. So they just basically just told you as retaliation, like, we don't want you at all. They didn't have the audacity to call you themselves. They had somebody else call you.
That's exactly right. That's
God.
exactly right. And I talked to my lawyer, and my post was completely legal. It never identified them. I think I'm greatly amused that they were offended because they recognized themselves.
Yeah.
If they had read this and go, that's not us, but no, that was exactly them. So, by a curious set of circumstances, our union sued to stop that contract, and that little fire department ended up contracting with another agency. That was a year of great uncertainty. Several of us were at risk of not having jobs. The firefighters were all guaranteed jobs, but the efficiencies were going to come. This is just like a corporate merger. There's going to be efficiencies by cutting out people at the top. No guarantees the top people would have a job. Well, this larger organization had a vacancy for emergency manager. That was one of the roles I've done for my little agency. And they offered me a job. And because we're in the middle of this contractual obligation, it was essentially a transfer. My seniority, my benefits transferred to this new organization. So I carried over, like a bank of 1,400 sick hours, and my seniority carried over. How I dealt with that year was, I'm a big believer that things will work out. I rode that train to the end and had a good outcome. Oh, I'd been interviewing and I turned down some interviews. It's like, I'm going to ride this to the end. And it turned out it worked out really well for me. This new organization um, appreciated my expertise. When I met with their HR person, it says, you understand my hearing limitations, and here's what I'm going to need to do to make that work. And they were 100% behind me. And it was just a night and day difference in how they handled it. They were glad to have me. They regularly ask me if there's anything I need to do differently, in terms of hearing accommodations. The work is certainly has its own stress, but it was such a different environment.
And that's the difference between viewing accommodations in a certain way versus the other. Because what I have found over the years, that when you talk about reasonable accommodations, the HR default turns to you're trying to get out of work. That's not what this is. When I'm asking for accommodations, I'm asking for something that allows me to be 100% and give you everything I can to be the best employee that I can be. And if we can start talking about accommodations from that lens versus the other, like how can we support to get you? Because I've also seen some of the stuff that you've done since this new position, and you're killing it. And so this idea that you would not be where you are today and everything that we would have missed out on had you just gone down and just quit in the very beginning. And it's frustrating and inspiring at the same time, because as an organization, if you just flip that switch just a little bit and look at accommodations as supporting and uplifting instead of an us versus them mentality, everybody wins. And it's so simple that I don't understand it.
Yeah, my this large fire department I work for, it's a regular conversation. I'll share that the meeting was tough, or I had to do a meeting at someone else's facility and there was challenges. And my agency's always asking, what can we do? And it's been very little that they've had to provide. There's been very little cost on their part. And some of it is just simple things like, I don't want a desk phone because that involves a bunch of hardware and Bluetooth connections that aren't reliable. Just transfer everything to my cell phone. It connects to my Bluetooth connection and I'll hear it better. Great. They didn't have to do it the old fashioned way. They were so easy about do it the simple way. So it's been a challenge. I still consider myself an extremely fortunate person. I've had a 40-year career doing really interesting and worthwhile work in several fields. I have the time and ability and desire to fight for other people with the similar challenge. So we talk about accommodation in the workplace. As someone with a hearing loss, I'm entitled to accommodation in other parts of life, and I regularly fight that one. So, for example, there's a group called WashCap, Washington Captions. They sued the Washington State ferry system at least 15 years ago over accessibility. If there's an emergency,
Terrible.
oh God,
Riding ferries, terrible.
well, they have overhead announcements with safety, and then there's a disjointed caption that's played like 10 minutes later on a couple TVs that also run scrolling ads. Most of the TVs are broken. Well, they lost the lawsuit, but have never accommodated. And without my knowing about the lawsuit, I started pestering the ferry service about this. One, it looks like they got their PA system used from the Charlie Brown commercials, the TV shows, the ma, 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 ma. And the announcements in their parking lot, we're now boarding. If you've ever been to Anacortes, the ferry goes to 4, sometimes 5 locations. So it's really important you understand what they're saying, or you're going to wander off and you're going to gum up the line because you weren't in your car. And so I've been fighting them for a long time. I'm probably tagged as a terrorist because when I get on the ferry, I'm walking around with a clipboard noting how many of the TV screens are broken, and then so I just recently was invited to a meeting by one of the top people at Washington State Ferries. They reached out to me to give me an update on what they're doing and apologized for how slow it's gone. And so that was really satisfying. And then the National Hearing Loss Association just hosted a webinar for people who work in noisy environments, and they reached out to me to speak. And what I spoke on was not about technology. I spoke out about non-technological tips. And I was just really honored to be part of this group, which included someone in the food service industry, noisy restaurants and bars. Someone else on the panel is truly a rocket scientist, working in a noisy factory where they're assembling rockets. And I was just so thrilled to be included in that conversation. I've been fighting a battle with a big medical provider for years because they, the doctors, and they have procedures for helping you in an exam room to hear, but the check-in process is just atrocious. I've missed appointments because I can't hear them call my name. They roll their eyes, they get exasperated. I've had them make jokes about my hearing loss. So
Right
that's
in
another
front of
one.
you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I just because I wanted to acknowledge that kind of stuff happens to me all the time, right? One of the things that I've been trying to get Oregon to do is come up with an augmentative communication board at rest stops,
Oh,
because we have people who are nonverbal autistic. What happens if their parents have a medical emergency? They're nonverbal. They can't speak, I should say. Sorry, nonverbal folks. I apologize. Non-speaking is something I learned recently. When you have somebody who's non-speaking and in an emergency, how do you call for help? Well, if there was an emergency contact board that somebody could go up to in an emergency and point, hey, call the fire department. Hey, call the, it's just a little sign. And that would just change things like incredibly on playgrounds and rest stops and things like that. But it's like the cost is too prohibitive. And it's like, I get it, I guess. But at the same time, it's like, it's interesting that we're in a spot in society where we have to fight for these little things. But here's the thing that people don't realize. Every win that we have helps everybody. So like the stuff that you're pushing for, will it help people who are hard of hearing? Yes. Will it help everybody? Yes. So why not?
many of these things aren't expensive.
Yeah.
I have a huge frustration. I call it the Starbucks syndrome, although it applies to many businesses. So go to Starbucks. I want a chocolate chip cookie and a 12-ounce, excuse me, oat latte with no flavor. And then apparently there's some additional information they need from me, and they're trying to ask, well, is there a place that's noisier than a Starbucks where they got the espresso machines going and there's several orders going on and there's, people working, and I can't hear. And then during COVID, when there was plastic screens and masks, so I'll ask, I'm sorry, I'm gesture to my cochlear implant, I can't hear you. And their only solution in those situations is just to keep repeating it. It's like, have you no creativity? Could you point to the thing you're asking about? Could you gesture? I did have someone recently pick up a piece of paper and write their question. That was so simple, but most people don't think of it. They just, I can't hear you. And their only solution, I'm deaf. Their only solution is to just keep repeating it verbally. So the number of small businesses, I just shrug and walk out until I go find a store that is willing.
And how frustrating that is to like have to walk out
It's embarrassing. It's
for the
frustrating.
only reason is because you have a hearing loss. And so just because like I see on people's faces sometimes too, like I used to have a friend who was in a wheelchair, and I used to hate going to the bank with her. I would wait outside because if I went in with her, they would talk to me. Like, no, she just has a bad ankle and she can't walk. Like, she's not in a wheelchair because she can't bank. But yet almost every single time you go into a bank with somebody in a wheelchair, they don't talk to the person in the wheelchair, even though it's their account.
No.
And it's like, I don't know her account information. I don't want to know her balance. Like, that's none of my business. But yeah, that's the default. And it's just, it's so challenging.
Did I tell you my Costco story? I don't want to say a corporate name. Let's call it Buy a Lot Co. So Costco. I got my $400 worth of stuff on the conveyor belt, and it's a super clattery, noisy environment. I think I'd just been out hiking, so I didn't even have my hearing aids in, and which makes it my fault. And someone comes up to me carrying a little tablet computer and says something about there's a hold on my credit card. I was like, whoa, what, what's going on? One, did I not use my Visa? Did I use the wrong credit card again? No, and he's mumbling, and I keep looking at him and says, I cannot hear you. Please face me. And he's poking at his tablet and mumbling. And no, sir, I cannot hear you. Please face me and tell me what the problem is. I'm holding up the line. I'm embarrassed. I'm looking at this pile of stuff. I don't go to Costco very often. I don't want to make this trip again. I almost walked out and left all that stuff on the conveyor. Finally, he tells me, well, it's a marketing tool to upsell me to a different membership. But it took a good 10, 15 minutes of my asking him to please speak and face me. And it occurred to me later that he could also be someone who has a challenge, maybe communicating. Maybe he's not comfortable speaking directly.
But here's where I push back on that, right? Because if that was the case, he would quickly pull out something to write on. He would quickly pull out a solution, right? Because if you're experiencing that, you know what it's like and you're going to have empathy. The fact that he didn't tells me that he heard you every single time and just instead of being human and having empathy, just kept going over the same thing. And frustrating.
Well, I don't give up easily. So I paid for my order, loaded it in my car, and then came in and I found a manager. And I gave him an earful. And his explanation was, well, normally when we have a deaf customer, we talk to their caregiver. Oh, fuck you. Oh, you're talking to the wrong person. So that got elevated all the way to corporate. And I said, you need training for your people. Oh, we have a very good training program. Obviously not.
Let me see it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Talk to their caregiver.
And this is also something that drives me nuts about fire departments here, right? Because one of the things that we offer from the Autism Society of Oregon is free training for firefighters to how to respond to an emergency situation when you have a non-speaking autistic adult or child. Almost zero of the fire departments in Oregon will take us up on that training. Oh, we're good. We know. But then the same thing, like I'm in Woodburn now, and I went to the Woodburn Fire Department because I always introduce myself to the fire department. Hey, I'm autistic. I may need you to be a little different when you come to help me. And I was kind of shooed away today at the Woodburn Fire Department. So contrast that with Kaiser, where they're like, yeah, well, we put you in the system. We have this process involved so that we know. And they had me fill out a form. There wasn't even anything on the form that indicated anything about a disability. It was all about like, do you have cardiac things and like this medical thing or that medical thing? There's no conversation about accommodations. And that frustrates me because like, then I worry like what's going to happen if there's an emergency response and I'm stuck because the fire alarms have rendered me unable to leave the house.
Well, there's a couple different software solutions and different departments may choose to use or not. So one's called Smart 911 and you can enter your vehicle license number, whatever cell phone numbers or home numbers you use, and you can enter all the general physical medical things, cardiac, diabetes, but you can also enter communication limitations or challenges. So I have a note, I have a great deal of trouble using the telephone. I can't hear clearly. So it's all in there. Now, not every dispatch center uses it. It's a commercial product, and it's called Smart 911. And then my department uses a different one called, I think it's called Community Connect. And I've not registered with it to see how thorough, but there are some products that dispatch centers can use to capture it. Now, the government, the dispatch center, can't collect that information on you unless you opt to share it. It's because we don't really want them doing it. Yeah. We have a list. So I know there's been some improvement, but it's still up to the local jurisdiction to decide.
And it gets kind of in that sticky point though, where it's like frustrating from the person's perspective because like they used to have sensory friendly fire alarms. They used to have like different they used to have like for example, the smoke detector that you could record your your voice so that if you have a child who is on the autism spectrum, instead of hearing the alarm, you hear your mom or your dad in a loud but calm voice saying, "Hey, Sean, there's an emergency. We need you to come outside. Hey, Sean, there's an emergency. We need you to come outside," which is way different than those loud, like, I'm going to hide in a corner because it's so damn deafening. Like, I get the idea behind it, but you can't find those anymore.
That's unfortunate because that sounds like a really clever solution to a real problem.
Yeah.
I just spent a bunch of money to get a visual fire alarm for my bedroom because it occurred to me if my wife's not there to wake me up
Yeah.
this weekend, she's traveling. And if the smoke detector went off, I wouldn't know. So now I have one that makes this insane flashing light. It gets my attention. So advocacy is not just about the workplace. It's about all these areas in my life, and I engage in it willingly, but it's tiring. And for example, I had a complaint about FedEx. They drove across our yard and left deep furrows, and there is no way to send a message to FedEx by text or email. I made 27 phone calls. Their automated voice system said, "Did you say poke me with a stick?" "No, I said property damage." And, "Oh, you need to call customer service." I am there's try entering their automated attendant. "I'm deaf." "Oh, you need to call our customer service number." Stop it. And so I will have no shortage of hobbies when I retire. I will fight this battle because I'm stubborn.
So we've been at this for about an hour now, and one of the things I would like to sort of wrap up this whole conversation about is for people with disabilities out there, because I don't want them to give up. Like I know it's tough, right? And I think this is a perfect spot for the analogy I just heard from my friend Frances. I love you, Frances. You're the best. Um, she said, when you start getting into this work of like disability advocacy, of advocacy against all of the various isms, if you will, it's like you're diving into a pool of molasses. And it's hard swimming in this pool, but until you've been a part of that pool, you don't know what it's like, because you're not just carrying you through these difficult times. You have the intended, unintended, whatever it is, consequence of carrying everybody behind you on your back, because if you don't get it right, it's going to impact somebody else down the line. And so with the stakes so high, it's exhausting sometimes to get into the pool and do this work, because you're fighting against a system that instead of using water is still using molasses. And so for those people out there with disabilities, from somebody who's been through it and is now in that successful piece, what do you have to say for folks?
I have two thoughts. One is, um, frequently I'll request an accommodation, a conference, a theater, while traveling, and they'll pull out a dusty box. The batteries are dead, and you're the first person to ask for this in a very long time. So to address that, I'm going to be teaching a session in April at a hearing loss meeting on self-advocacy, is in helping empower people. They may not know what they're entitled to, and they may not know the benefit of asking. So I'm really, that's one of the initiatives I want to work on, is not just my asking, but to show you how to ask. And then the other is, and this sounds maybe cliche, I feel so fortunate in my life. I have a wonderful family. I've had a 40-year career doing interesting and worthwhile work. I've had some health challenges recently, and losing my hearing as a adult sucks. But at the end of the day, I consider myself very fortunate. So is it the glass is half full or glass is half empty? It's like I described about going to my work. I'm lucky to be here and be able to contribute in making my community safe. And I used to say I hate my hearing aids. No, I hate my hearing loss. Turns out I like the hearing aids. So it's I think you really can change how you look at it. And I've been fortunate. I've been winning a lot of these battles, but and I don't want to minimize the battles other people are doing, but I think we can change our voice a little bit and try to find something to grasp onto to feel better about it.
Because at the end of the day, folks, we're talking about people's lives, right? We're not talking about objects. We're not talking about things. We're talking about small actions that have extreme consequences because people have a physical condition. And I also want to acknowledge that someone's disability does not define them. So if you're placing a label or defining somebody based on their disability, you have no idea what you're talking about. Not even identical twins have the same story in life. And so if you know somebody who has a disability, accommodate them as best as you can. And the key is just treating us like we are humans. That's all we ask. Just treat us like we're humans, because you know what? We are. That's all there is to it. Greg, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, Sean, thanks so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I've learned a little bit about your struggles, and I enjoyed the chance to share what I'm doing to help people in my situation.
And where can people go to find more information?
So Washington State, and I assume Oregon too, has a hearing loss association chapter. There's a national hearing loss association, and they have a website with many, many resources, invitations to webinars. They have a lot of materials on their website. So that's a big, big resource for people in my world.
And I'll end with this, folks, because I think this is important too. When you're out in the community and you see an example of ableism, like the Costco example that you have, advocate and speak up, because a lot of people don't have the ability to advocate for themselves, especially in the moment, right? We're going through something, we're experiencing ableism, so to have a voice and speak up for yourself is way harder than it is to speak up for someone else. So if you see somebody struggling, don't go up to the person struggling. Go up to the person who's committing the ableism and say, hey, that's not right. Let me help this situation. Because it should never be about the person experiencing the ableism. And I think I'll end it on that. And I'll end the podcast the way I always end the podcast, folks. Be kind. We all live on the same planet. We breathe the same air, and this place would just be a little bit better if we treated everybody with a little kindness and respect.